Hello, welcome to Precision Technologies. I am Venkat. This is part 95 of ASP.NET video series. In this session, we'll discuss about implementing password reset link in ASP.NET. Now, if you have forgotten your password to an application, some of the applications actually help you recover your forgotten password. So they will ask you a series of security questions, and if you answer them correctly, they will send you an email with the forgotten password. And remember, the forgotten password is sent in a plain text format to your email, which is definitely not secure. That's why most of the applications these days actually will email you a link where you can reset your password. Okay, so in this session we'll discuss about how to generate and email that password reset link. Let me actually show you how that password reset link looks like. So this is how the password reset link looks like. So here, I have just generated this using ASP.NET. So if you look at this, it says dear test. Test is the username. So dear test, please click on the following link to reset your password, and then the link itself. And then finally a signature Precision Technologies. And if you look at the link, it says http://localhost, because the application is running on my machine. So localhost web application 1 is the name of the web application, and within this web application 1 I have registration folder. So within registration folder we have the change password. Okay, change password.aspx, change password.aspx. And then the most important thing to identify here is it is expecting a query string. I mean, it has a query string parameter there, UID, and then a unique number there. Okay, now what is the purpose of this unique ID? We'll discuss about that in the next video session when we actually reset the password. In this session, we'll discuss about generating this reset link itself. Okay, so obviously now when I click this link, I will access the change password page, and tomorrow using this unique identifier, we'll take this unique identifier, look up the user ID, and then provide fields here for the user to actually change his password. That will be in the next video session. Okay, now another important thing to understand is why did we add change password, register, reset password, all these pages to registration folder? That's because within registration folder we have this web.config file, and it says in the authorization element allow users is equal to star, meaning it's going to allow every user access to this page in spite of whether they are authenticated or not, including the anonymous users. Okay, and it makes perfect sense, because why will ever any user get to these pages if they don't have a username to log in? They want to register with your application, so we should allow anonymous access. That's why register page is within registration folder. And why will ever a user get to change password or reset password page? That's because if they have forgotten their password, they want to reset and change their password, so there's no way for them to log in, and that's why we have to allow anonymous access to those pages as well. That's why all these pages are actually present in registration folder. Okay, now let's go ahead and look at the steps that are required to generate this password reset link. Obviously the first step is to create this reset password page itself. So I have this reset password page, and if you look at this page, it has very simple HTML, the plain text reset my password, username, and then we have a text box where the user can enter their username for which we want to reset the password, and then they click this reset password button, upon which we want to generate that link and then send that link to the registered email. Okay, and obviously a label control to display the success or failure of sending that reset password link. Okay, so that's the first step. We have designed that very simple HTML. I'll have this HTML posted on my blog as well, just in case if you want to have a look at that later. And then when I click this, that's when we want to actually generate the reset link. Okay, so the next step is to actually create this table TBL reset password request. Now there's a lot of text here in this paragraph. We'll worry about that in just a bit. But let's go ahead and create the table. So if you look at this table, TBL password reset request, it has got 3 columns: ID, user ID, and reset request date time. So reset request date time, that's going to be pretty simple and straightforward. Whenever the user requests the reset link to be sent, that's the date and time. And then the user ID, which user ID? So if you look at TBL users table, every username has got an ID associated with that. So that's the ID, user ID. okay, which is in that's this user ID. And look at that, that's a foreign key referencing TBL users table and the ID column. And then ID, this is important, and that's what you see within this email that we received, the globally unique identifier. It's a 32-bit unique number. Okay, so that's that column UID. I mean ID, and that's going to act as the primary key for this particular table. Okay, so we want to create this table. I have already created that. So if you look at that table, it's going to have that ID column, which is a GUID, and then user ID foreign key to the TBL users table, and reset request date time. Okay, so what's the next step? The next step is to actually create a stored procedure. Okay, and let's look at what the stored procedure is doing. Hopefully you'll understand the purpose of that in a bit. Okay, so if you look at this stored procedure, it's very simple and straightforward. Okay, so SP reset password, that's the name of the stored procedure. So this stored procedure is taking in a username. So whatever username that we enter within this page, reset password, so whatever username that we enter in this text box, we will send that to this stored procedure. And what is the stored procedure going to do that with that username? It selects, okay, is there, user ID with that username? Do we have a user in this TBL users table? Okay, that's what we are checking, where user name is equal to @username. If there is a record, then pick up the user ID, which is the ID, and email of that user, and store them in these two variables that we have. Okay, and then what we are doing here, this is again very simple here. If @user ID is not null, so if the user ID is there, if it's existing in the table, then the username that he has supplied is a valid username for which we want to reset the password. Okay, so if username exists, what we are doing, look at that, a globally unique identifier. I'm creating a variable of type unique identifier, and then I am assigning that to this variable. Why am I doing that? Because we want to insert a row into this table, TBL reset password request table. Okay, so we're going to insert a new row into that table. Look at that, it has three columns: ID, user ID, and reset request date time. The values are this new GUID that we have just generated, and the user ID. Where is that user ID coming from? From this variable. Okay, based on the username we have retrieved that. And then finally the current date and time using the getDate function. So we are inserting that into this table. And then finally, since the username exists and we have inserted a row into this table, okay, we this it's a success. The username is there, so we want to reset the password for that user. So we are selecting 1 as the return code indicating success, and then the GUID itself, the globally unique identifier, the 32-bit unique identifier that you can see here, and then the email of the user to which we want to send the link. Okay, so we select them. Otherwise, if the user ID does not exist for the given username, then we are selecting 0 as return code, null as the unique ID, and null as email. So your output will look something like this. Okay, so based now we will go ahead and create the stored procedure, and then we will invoke the stored procedure from our .NET application. And based on what we get back from this stored procedure, we then either send an email after forming the reset password link. Otherwise, we'll display an error message saying that the username is not found. Okay, so I have already created the stored procedure here. So if I expand programmability and then stored procedures, you should see that SP reset password stored procedure. That's exactly the same stored procedure that we have here. Okay, now let's go ahead and invoke this on the reset password link button click event. Okay, so I have this here, and before that, I actually have a function which sends an email to the end user. So let me copy that function. This is a private function because I just want to use this function in this page. So that's why I made this private. Okay, now first of all, let's get rid of these compilation errors. Mail message class, this is present in system.net.mail. Now we have discussed about sending emails in the previous sessions of this video series. If you haven't watched that, I would strongly encourage you to do so before continuing with this session. I will, however, have a link to sending emails ASP.NET video in the description of this video when I upload that. Okay, so system.net.mail, that's the namespace in which we have mail message class, and string builder class is present in system.text namespace. So let's go ahead and import that as well. So using system.text. Okay, so what are we doing here? This method, send password reset email method, this method is taking three parameters: the email of the user to which we want to send this email, and the username, because if you look at the email, it says dear test. What is test? If you look at the TBL user table, test is the name of the user. That's the username. Okay, so we need the username, we need the to email address, and we need this globally unique identifier as well. So these are the things that we are actually passing to this send password reset email method. Okay, so what we are doing here, we are creating a mail message object, okay, with the from and to emails. Okay, now to email, I'm using the parameter as it is because when we invoke this method, that's when we will pass the to email. And then look at this, all these lines are actually building that link that you see here. Basically this body, we are building this body here. So how should our body look like? Dear username. Where is username coming from? It's coming as an input parameter to this method. So dear username and then two HTML breaks. That's why you see two lines here between dear test and then please click. Okay, and then please click on the following link to reset your password, and that's what you see here. And finally, one HTML break, and then look at the link I'm forming here: http:// localhost web application 1 registration folder change password.aspx uid is equal to whatever unique ID that we are going to pass into this method. We are appending that to that link, and then again two HTML breaks so that we get two line breaks, and then finally Prajim Technologies within bold HTML. So that is the entire body, okay, email body, and that's what you see here. Okay, so once we have the email body, look at that, this is important: mail message is body HTML is equal to true, otherwise this break elements will be shown as literal text on the email. So you have to set that to true, okay, because we are using HTML within the body. Alright, and then we are setting the body property to that string builder object. Now if you're wondering why are we using string builder object, because if you're modifying a string, it's always better to use string builder object because they are mutable, whereas strings of type string object are immutable. So that's why from a performance perspective, use string builder object if you're modifying it multiple times. Okay, and then we are setting that as the body, and then the subject is reset your password, and that's what you should see here within the subject: reset your password. And SMTP client, basically I am using Gmail SMTP client, so smtp.gmail.com, the port number at which Gmail SMTP works is 587, so that's the port there. And then obviously we need to specify the credentials. I don't have my credentials here. If you are sending an email from your account to somebody else, then you use your email and your password, your Gmail password. Your SMTP client will authenticate, and if it's the right password, it's going to send from your account, from email address to that email address and email. And finally, Google works on HTTPS. So if you look at this Gmail, it works on HTTPS. So we have to set enable SSL to true, and finally send the mail message itself. So this is the method which is doing the work of sending the email. Okay, but then we need to provide to this function the to email, the username, and the unique ID. Okay, and where are they coming from? They are coming from your stored procedure. So if you look at the stored procedure, you get the to email and unique ID. And where will you get the username from? The username will actually come from the reset password page itself. On the text box, they enter the username. Okay, so we are going to make use of all those three fields, pass them to this method, and you're done. Okay, but then before that you actually have to invoke the stored procedure. Depending on what the stored procedure is going to return back to you, you make a decision whether to send an email or to show an error message to the end user. Okay, so again I have that here, and again it's going to be very simple ADO.NET code. So let me copy the implementation of the button click event there and paste it there. Okay, now let's get rid of those errors, the compilation errors. The configuration manager class is present in system.configuration namespace, and SQL connection, SQL command, they are present in system.data.sql client namespace, and the parameter type, the command type is actually present, the command type enum is present in system.data namespace. So let's go ahead and import that. Okay, so that should get rid of the compilation errors. And now if you look at this, this is pretty straightforward ADO.NET code. Okay, so and we have discussed about ADO.NET in a very great detail. I'll have a link to the ADO.NET video series as well if you're new to that. Alright, so what are we doing here? We're creating the connection string. We are retrieving the connection string value from web.config file. So we have the connection string in web.config file which we are retrieving, creating the SQL connection object. We are using the using statement because the connection object will automatically be closed when the scope of that is lost. And then we are creating the SQL command object, and if you look at that, we are invoking the sp reset password which we have just created. So that is this password. That's stored procedures. And then we are using the connection object which we have created, command type. We are specifying that it's a stored procedure, and this stored procedure, if you look at that, it expects a username parameter. So we need to pass that to this stored procedure, which we are doing by creating the SQL parameter object. And where is the value for that username parameter coming from? That's coming from the text box that's present on this page. So that's the text box. And then we are adding that parameter to the command object using the parameters collection property. Open the connection, execute the reader, and we are using execute reader because we are getting a row of data back from the stored procedure. Okay, and then what we are doing, we are using a while loop to loop through that reader, and then we are checking the return code. So if you look at what is the return code that we are getting back, so if the username exists, then we are inserting a row into that table, and then we are selecting 1 as the return code, meaning the username is present, this is the unique identifier, and this is the email of the user. Now if you are wondering why we are using a unique identifier, don't worry about that. We'll discuss about that in the next video session when we actually change the password. Okay, so select 1 as the return code, globally unique identifier, and the email of the user. Okay, so we check the return code. It will either be 1 or 0. Okay, so we can convert that to a boolean type. So convert to boolean. If it's 1, it will be converted to true, and if it is true, then what we are doing, we are invoking that send password reset email method. This method that we have just discussed about, it requires an to email. So where is to email coming from? In this column as email. Let's quickly test this so that you can understand this properly. So I'm going to pass a username. So if you look at TBL users table, so there is a username called a test. So I'm going to send that as test. Okay, look at that. When I execute this stored procedure, look at what I'm getting back. I'm getting 1 as the return code, a unique ID, and the email that is associated with that username. Okay, so this is how the data will come back to the application. So within the application, what we are doing, we are converting the return code. So what's the return code? That's 1. That will be converted to true. So it comes inside the if block, and then we are retrieving the email from this email column and passing it to this method. And similarly, we are retrieving the username. Where is the username coming from? The text box itself. And finally, the unique ID. Again, the column name is unique ID. So we are passing that to this method, which will send the email, and then finally we display a message to the user stating an email with instructions to reset your password is sent to your registered email. Otherwise, if the username is not found, then we display username not found error message, which is simple and straightforward. Okay. Now, if you look at what has just happened, since we have tested this, if I press F5, select star from that TBL reset password request, look at that, it generated that unique identifier, user ID is 1. If you look at TBL users table, so for test, what is the user ID? That's 1. And this is the date and time I have requested a reset link to be sent. Okay? So actually, if I run this now, this is not going to practically send an email now because I don't have my actual Gmail username and password here. Okay, but if I enter an invalid username here and click reset password, look at that, username not found. But if I enter a valid email address, it's going to fail now. After some time it will throw an exception and will fail. Look at that, when it's sending an email it fails because the SMTP server requires a secure connection or the client was not authenticated. So I didn't provide a valid email address here and a password, that's why it didn't fail. But if you're testing it, give your email address and your Gmail password, it's going to send an email just like this to your inbox. Okay, so in this session we have discussed about how to actually send password reset link. In the next video session we will see how to actually change the password using that reset link, and in that process we'll also understand why are we using this globally unique identifier, why can't we use this integer user ID instead of that. On this slide, you can find resources for ASP.NET, C#, and SQL Server interview questions. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.